Hey everyone, Greg Meskel here with you as our At Home with USA Water Polo continues. This week, it's our last week of our schedule. We've done some 15 weeks now of At Home with USA Water Polo. We're going to have more At Home content coming after the holiday, but this kind of comes to a conclusion, our daily schedule. We appreciate everyone that has been joining us. And this week, we kind of close out celebrating USA Water Polo, some great things about the sport, some people that have spent their life in the sport. And we start off on this Monday with the chairman of the USA Water Polo Board of Directors, Mike Graff. Mike, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Greg. Great to see you, and thanks for what you're doing.
And thank you as well. Appreciate you being here. I think a lot of people know your title now with USA Water Polo and all the work you've done, and we'll get into that more. But for someone that maybe doesn't know, how did you get involved in water polo? Your history goes back a number of years as a player. Tell us about your introduction to the sport and what got you hooked.
Well, I started playing in the last century. How's that sound?
It's a while back.
Well, there was no water polo in my high school. There was no club water polo. I'm from Pittsburgh. And I got to college, and there was a requirement that all freshmen had to be able to swim the length of a pool. And I wasn't being recruited to swim. It wasn't good enough for that. So I went down to take my swimming test and get it out of the way. And it turned out the water polo team was getting ready to practice in a few minutes. So I did my swim test and got that done. And I went over and talked to the guys because I'd seen it played. And so I went over and talked to them and asked them what they were doing. And they told me they were the college team and they were getting ready to start the season. And then they said, well, why don't you join us? You want to try this out. And that's what happened. And so I did that for my freshman year. That summer, I went out to Los Angeles to play in the summer. And I played in Beverly Hills and then at the Coliseum pool in LA for a local team, friends from the Beverly Hills club or whatever it was, asked me to do that, and I was working and stayed there. And then I kept playing and then did the same thing after my junior year when I was lucky enough to be named captain. I went out and played at Golden West in Huntington Beach for Tom Hermstad, and he had a whole bunch of people playing, so he just let me in, and that was incredibly helpful for me in terms of really accelerating my development. And then I went back and played my senior year, and that was great. And then after about a year, we moved back to Pittsburgh, and I really missed it. And at this time, some other things were happening. There were a number of other people coming home from college, from Bucknell especially, and Slippery Rock in Western Pennsylvania. And so we started a club. I started a club, and we started playing against people like New York Athletic Club, Bill Smith, who was on the club in Philadelphia. There were people in Chicago, St. Louis. And then the University of Pittsburgh program started with Mike Schofield and a number of Puerto Rican junior national team players. And that really added to the momentum. And then it became a very vibrant local scene. And I did that until I went back to business school.
And as you mentioned, Pittsburgh, if anyone is curious for a deeper dive on that, swimmingworld.com has done some recent really deep dives in the Pittsburgh water polo teams of the late 70s and how strong they were, backed by, as you mentioned, a lot of members of the Puerto Rican national team. So you were involved in water polo, and then, as you mentioned, you went back into business school. Did you kind of have to put water polo off to the side for a little while in your life, or was it always something that you kind of had one of your eyes on, trying to find a way to stay engaged?
Well, I quit playing then, and I was out of it for, I guess I went to business school. We moved to New York, and I went to try to play with the New York Athletic Club because I knew those guys, but my job was too demanding. I couldn't make it to practice, which was early in the evening, and we traveled a lot. I was just never around. So I hung it up basically in 1981 and didn't get back involved until 2006, so 25 years later. We had moved to London and Montreal and just didn't, and had kids and was busy, et cetera. So just there was no room for it.
One of the things we're going to talk about this week with other current and former water polo players is the kind of the inherent gifts that water polo gave them, things they didn't even maybe realize they knew until they got into school or to work. I'm curious if you could give people a little bit of an idea of the kind of work that you've gone into post school, and maybe how being part of a water polo team has helped at all in kind of the corporate world.
Sure. Right out of business school, right out of college, I ran a small factory in Pittsburgh, small steel mill, which is, that's Pittsburgh's legacy. Um, and then after business school, I became a management consultant in New York and then later in London. And then I became a CEO of an airplane manufacturer up in Montreal called Bombardier. And we made business jets and regional aircraft. And so I guess a few things that really helped me from the sport. First, all the skills that we all talk about. I'll start with teamwork. So I learned how to be part of a team. I was lucky enough to become a captain my junior year. So I learned a lot about leadership from that and leading really terrific group of young men. And then when we started the Pittsburgh club, I got entrepreneurial experience from starting a club and being able to be with all those great people there. And so those things really helped, in addition to the normal things you get from most sports in terms of discipline and toughness and dealing with adversity. And just I got in great physical condition, which has helped me the rest of my life. But those were the key skills, and problem solving. And those things really came back to be very helpful to me.
You've read these articles. I know I've read them as well. And it always puts water polo in a positive light, where it'll say something like, if you want to hire someone good for your team, go find a water polo player. Or here are the reasons why water polo players make great members of your team in a business. It's probably some of the things that you just described, but maybe things you've heard anecdotally from other people in the business world that have hired water polo players, or from working with other water polo players. Is there something specific about that sport, maybe the toughness aspect of it, just that you have to put so much time into it, that lends itself to being a good employee, someone that people want to hire?
I think that, you get those things from most team sports, Greg. So I won't go overboard on it. But you rarely, and you broadcast a lot of games, you rarely see someone get the ball at one end of the pool and go all the way to the other end and score in any kind of I'll call it a serious level of competition. Whereas in basketball, someone can get a rebound and drive the whole length of the court and score, right? It doesn't happen very often in water polo. So I think you're always, because the ball travels so much more quickly when it's out of the water through a pass than it does when you're swimming with it, that advancing the ball, you just have to pass the ball. And it's a sport where you have to do more of that than almost anything else. So it really, and there's rarely less than usually 3 or 4 passes before a goal can be scored. It really does lend itself to always keeping your head up, looking for others, being very aware of your situation, and looking for that small advantage and being decisive about it when you see it. So I think those are some of the things, besides the ability to work hard, have stamina, stick-to-itiveness, try to be helpful, all those things that do make for good team players, good employees.
Yeah, you bring up a great point. Unless it's a kind of a game that doesn't have much at stake, you rarely see a player go coast to coast in water polo. There is almost always passing involved. It is so dependent on teamwork. You had talked earlier about being out of the game from essentially 1981 to 2006. How did you work your way back into the sport? I know we'll get into more about what you did on the board of directors with USA Water Polo, what you've continued to do, but what was that entry like back into the sport after being away from it for so long?
Well, I never gave up my relationships with my teammates and my friends, and those were, and still are, most of the best friends that I have. So I was always sort of buzzing around, people like Mike Schofield coaching at Navy. So I didn't lose touch, and I certainly followed my college program and the Pittsburgh program. But reality is, I got a call from Russ Haferkamp, who had been designated by the board of U.S. Water Polo to lead a nominating committee to go recruit a new board. U.S. water polo was not doing very well in the early 2000s. There were deep financial troubles. There were many conflicts of interest. The board was very large, 40, 50 plus, and things were just not being, decisions were not being made for the right reasons, not objectively. And the USOC at that time was threatening to pull the certification of the NGB if things didn't reform. And one of the things they requested, and this was when Peter Uberoth was running the USOC, was that we get to a more smaller board with more independence, more people with professional backgrounds outside of the sport, business skills and other skills, so that they could put the NGB, like the others, on firmer footing and make it robust again. So that's what happened. And he'd gotten my name from somebody, I'm not sure who.
So when they asked you to be a part of this, you know, you'd obviously had your time as a player, and then you'd had your success in kind of the business world. Is there any trepidation on your part that, like, wait, I love this sport, I want to make sure that it's done right before you kind of jump in with 2 feet to be a person that's going to help turn it around?
Well, I called a few people and did my diligence on the current situation. And like normal, when you say that, I probably knew 5% of what I should have known.
Yeah.
But at least I could say I made some effort. It turned out that I had gone from working I was a CEO of a $10 billion business. So it was very intense and global responsibility for that. And when we moved back to New York, I had more time. And I joined a private equity firm, and I was responsible for a number of companies, mostly in aerospace. But I was in much greater command of my own schedule. And look, I had gotten so much out of the sport, and I'd picked up a number of other skills. I'd done a lot of nonprofit work during my business career. I'd led some big companies, and turnarounds were one of the things I specialized in. And this qualified for that. And I figured that given all that the sport had done for me, if I could give back and help get it straightened out, that would be totally appropriate.
And I want to dive into more of your journey with the board, as you kind of alluded to, but you hit on an interesting point there about all the sport had given you. And I think everyone that plays water polo for at least some period of time will kind of refer to the family environment and the kind of the close-knit nature of the game. You were at a point in your life where you're finally getting a little free time, right? As you talked about in your schedule, and you could have gone in a bunch of different directions with how to spend that. Water polo ends up being the thing. I imagine part of that was feeling like you still had such closeness to the sport with those relationships, even if you weren't playing in the game anymore.
Absolutely. And those were, when I was active, I was in whatever you call it, your formative years. And those experiences were very, very important to me from sort of 17, 18 to 25, 30. And I didn't think twice about it. I knew it would be a big commitment, but I thought it would be worthwhile. And luckily, I'm not really a good committee member. Luckily, it worked out that you needed to have we only had 8 people on the board. The chair had to be independent. There were only a few people who were independent, as defined by, our rules, which meant you couldn't be a club official, or you couldn't have a conflict, or real or perceived. And none of our people had real conflicts, but if they were a club official, that deemed them as not being independent. So I said, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to go all in. And fortunately, I was elected to be the chair. So we were able to get right to the agenda. And it was a great group of people at the beginning, Bill Smith included, and Ed Reynolds included. And so we started out peeling back the onion and learning what we should have learned before we said yes. And it was quite a bit of work to do, but it was it was very rewarding because we started to make progress right away.
And so that journey starts in 2006, and it's continued for more than a decade. You'd alluded to your specialty being turnarounds, although I'm sure this was a turnaround unlike anything else you had dealt with, right? Not being in this corporate space. What's this journey been like for you? If you think back to the first couple of years when you're just trying to, as you said, kind of peel that onion back, understand where things are at, and then get things going in the right direction.
Yeah, well, the difference of a nonprofit, and I've done a lot of nonprofit work before too, but nothing this challenging, is you're dealing with a lot of volunteers, and a big audience out there that, who former players and coaches and referees and all the different constituents. In the corporate world, you're the boss, right? You have the employees and you got a team. And once you decide with your team what you're going to do, you communicate that, then you get on with it. This was a bit different because we had so many influencers around, and USOC had to be dealt with, and part of FINA. So there just were a lot of other orbits that we were in, which made it managing the process very important, as well as dealing with the substance of the work, which was had a deficit. With the plans were not good in terms of how much revenue we had and the expenses. So we had to do all those things.
If you were at the Holiday Cup this past December in Princeton, we had a nice moment for you there, recognizing your time. And for those that don't know, your time as board chairman coming to an end here. What are some highlights for you? What are some moments that really stand out where you feel like, yes, this was part of what we set out to do, and we were able to make some tangible impact?
Well, the first thing was just look. We didn't come up with a really new mission. The mission's been there for a while, which is to grow the sport and to have great national teams. So we were very diligent about how we were doing for both of those things. And the third goal was really to be financially prudent, because you can't achieve anything unless you have the resources to go do it. So I'd say one of the first successes was just figuring out what to do, and then basically getting out of erasing our deficit, which took a few years. Finding Chris Ramsey as CEO, which we did in the first 6 months, was a big step forward. But you never know when you have somebody new come in if that's going to work or not. It was a big change for Chris, but knock wood, we were very fortunate to attract him, and he was an old player as well, and was looking to make a change in his life, and he was looking for something like this, and he came to us with a great nonprofit background, a record of being able to be very commercial, raise money, and that was very attractive to us. And so getting out of debt, I'd say, was the first big milestone. Then as we started putting things in place, we were ready to start our growth strategy, and we did that. We were very lucky to get help from McKinsey & Company on a pro bono basis. And I remember that made me feel great that that was my old firm, and I was talking to some of the folks about what they were doing. I told them what I was doing at water polo, and I said, we've dug out of the hole we were in, and now we're really ready to grow. And I think we had 25, 30,000 members at that time. Would you help us? And they said, we'll see if there's any interest. And they sent out an email, and they got 20 people around the world, people from India, you name it, who wanted to help. And this was for free and extra work for them. But they did that, led by Bob Sternfels, who's just a great guy, played for Stanford, and he joined our board. And that's where through their work, we came up with ideas like splash ball and growing the Junior Olympics and a number of other things, and growing masters, rejuvenating masters, because splash ball is great to get kids started, and masters are great because those are people usually been out for a while, have resources, may have children, and to get the whole family re-engaged. We thought that was a great way to accelerate growth. So that was a big milestone. And then when we hit 50,000 members last year, that was also one of the things I was most proud of. The Beijing Olympics was like we got struck by lightning. None of us expected to be able to get 2 medals for a medal for each of our teams. So that was a great milestone and really gave us a lot of momentum on our path to have great national teams. And the women have just continued to excel from there. And I'm very excited about where the men are. I think they've got a great young group, and I expect a lot from them. So I feel really good about us being true to our mission, making good progress. I'd love to see it as 100,000 members. We'll see if Chris will take that on as a challenge. He might want a little more time than I'm willing to give him, but that would be the next place to go. And I think that the sport's doing great. This pandemic has obviously been a big setback for everybody, from our Olympians to our junior Olympians, and having to cancel that tournament this summer, which, I mean, had astounding growth over the last decade. It was very sad, although I'm excited we're going to be able to do something late in the fall, but we'll be back and this will pass.
We're talking with Mike Graff, USA Water Polo Board Chairman, former water polo player. If you have any questions, comments for Mike, if you're watching live on Facebook, you can feel free to drop those in, and we'll pass them along. We got a couple of your friends here watching, Mike. So people saying hello and giving you shout outs. You talked about these kind of moments over time, the Olympics and splash ball, 50,000 members. I'm curious how they compare. If you think about your day job, right, and when you're able to turn a company around, right, they gave you a mission and you carried it out, or when you were as a CEO, you hit your goal or your mark for that year, whatever it might have been. How does that compare? You know, it's not that you're not working hard at those things, but then there's this water polo thing that we know is close to your heart. How do those feelings of success compare and contrast for you?
Well, I ran a big company, had 40,000 employees. So if you think about the broader implications of that, and this was difficult, you know, you felt responsibility that each of those employees and their families, so you multiply that number by whatever number you want to put on it, and the communities that you're part of really are dependent, you know, your performance, your ability to lead a team to achieve your goals. So it's a big deal. There's a lot of responsibility with that, and a lot of pressure, stress that puts on you. I would say, though, here, I know how important this game is, and now with 50,000 members, that's maybe not 50,000 families, but pretty close, 30, 40,000 families and extended families and neighbors. And they're trusting us to put a program together that will give them what they want to achieve, which is opportunity to get physically fit, to learn great skills like we talked about before, of teamwork and how to succeed, how to win, how to lose. And it's a lot of responsibility, and working with, I'm not directly responsible. Obviously, all of that is led by Chris and the team, but the board feels a great responsibility to do anything they can to support, to provide resources, to share experiences that would be helpful to the team to achieve our mission. And when you have so many people involved, and then all the Olympians that dedicate their lives for years to be able to represent our country, that's a lot of responsibility as well. So I'd say I don't see much of a difference. Achieving goals that are, you know, sort of large and ambitious is really rewarding.
We talked earlier about how your time with the board is coming to an end. What are you going to miss most about this role you've had since 2006? I'm
going to feel good about it. I'm not going to miss some things. I'm going to miss not being there when we win our next medals, and at least as directly involved. But I'll be there as a fan, I hope, as long as the health is good. And we've got a few ambitious goals, as you know, that I'd like to see us get achieved, like getting a home, national training center for the sport, which would be great for our national teams, but also I just can't wait to be able to go there for a JO finals or an NCAA championship and see the benefits that that new facility is going to add to really enhance and help grow. It's very mission driven because it's going to really help us grow. We're going to be able to present the sport better than it's ever been seen before. And I think that's going to attract a lot of fans and new players and enthusiasm. So I wish I could have happened on my watch, but at least I'm going to feel really good about getting the seeds planted for that and watching that bloom.
And you've alluded to it here, but after this part of your life is done being involved in this board of directors, you talked about being a fan. I imagine you're still going to try and be involved as, you know, as best as possible in the water polo community. How else do you kind of see yourself staying in the game going forward?
Well, I think I'm still very active in my college program to help them out, and delighted about Ted Minnis and what he's done for our program. It's just fantastic. And I'll be there. You know, if Chris wants to talk or you want to talk or somebody else wants to talk, I won't say no. And I hope to be able to see the teams play in person, and I'm going to have more time going forward. So I'm looking forward to all of that. I doubt I'm going to get in the water in a serious way going forward. The last time I did
that was my very next question was, when are you capping up again?
Yeah, well, I usually go back for some of our alumni games, and we had this college alumni tournament that I still think is a great idea, but it's taken a little more effort than I imagined. I remember, though, we got our old Pittsburgh team together for Masters Nationals about 8 years ago, one of the first Eastern teams to come out and play in it, and that was a ton of fun. Hard work. I trained a lot, but I didn't train enough.
Gotcha. Mike, this was great. I really appreciate all the thoughts you shared and your memories, and of course everything you've done for the sport of water polo. Thanks for taking the time to talk with us.
Pleasure, Greg. Thanks for what you're doing.